I don't think Afrikaners have been given enough participation post-94. I do think we are handy scapegoats. I do think making us victims of white genocide just makes us even more vulnerable in that regard also. That actually just makes it even worse. I do think that a lot of the ways in which Black economic empowerment has been applied just turned it into a corruption racket. None of that can be denied.
Yeah.
But at the
Complex.
same time, honestly, how do you function within the society? Do you separate yourself? Or do you function within the society and say that, you know what, I disagree with corruption in this government, but I also disagree with continued racism? Can you do both?
Joining me today in my virtual studio is Dr. Lindie Koorts, the Declaration's spokesperson. Nice to meet you. Welcome, Lindie.
Thank you very much.
Let's kick off with my first question, Lindie. What exactly not in my name?
So essentially it was an open letter in reaction to a report in the New York Times. So as you well know, it was in early February, so very soon after taking office, Donald Trump signed an executive order in which he declared that Afrikaners, white Afrikaners, would be welcome to the United States as refugees. But as with many of his executive orders, the details always have to be worked out later.
Mm-hmm.
So in October, the New York Times then reported, even though the first cohorts of refugees had arrived by then, only then were the further details with regards to the US's refugee program made known. And it came down to limiting the number of refugees to the US down from 125,000 a year to around 7,500. And from that reporting, about 7,000 of these places would be reserved for white Afrikaners. So that reignited the debate, which has been running all year, but it added further fuel to the fire. And it was in this context that I was approached by, another person I knew who got my number from someone else I know. You know how these networks work.
Mm-hmm. Want to name names?
Yes, I can name names. So the person who approached me was Louise van Rijn from the University of Stellenbosch. I had never met her before.
Yeah.
But she got my number from Rudy Swanepoel, a Dutch Reformed minister in Johannesburg, whom I do know very well. So if it's a recommendation from Rudy, I will listen. Again, that's how these networks work. And I heard later that my name was also suggested by Treda Prekel and Barend Legrandsie, both of them also co-signatories, with whom I had previously co-signed a similar declaration in 2020 in reaction to F.W. de Klerk's denial of Apartheid as a crime against humanity. So this is not my first rodeo, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
In any event, by the time I was approached, there were about 25 names already, most of whom I knew, some of whom I didn't. And it was essentially, I want to say a rebuttal of the narrative as reported in the New York Times. The focus was on refugees as such. Who qualifies as a refugee? Are Afrikaners refugees? Can you compare an Afrikaner refugee, in inverted commas, to someone from Gaza or Sudan? Or think of the amount of Afghans who are applying for asylum in the US after having worked with the US forces during those wars. So why elevate white Afrikaners over these groups who are literally fleeing for their lives? And the problem was that it elevates white dissatisfaction in South Africa over so many other atrocities around the world. But in my view and my reason for co-signing, and I insisted on inserting that into the letter, was that it harms our relations with our fellow South Africans back home. more signatories had added their names to it. It was actually aimed at the United States in the New York Times, but then it hit the South African press. And from there on took on a life of its own.
I think obviously part of the question is also who exactly not in your name, because there are certainly organizations, groups in South Africa that are actively pushing this narrative. So I want you to identify who not in your name.
So we mentioned Solidarity and AfriForum by name in this statement. And I will say when I read that part, because again, this is a joint document, I thought to myself, well, this is going to redirect the entire discussion to Solidarity and AfriForum, and that's precisely what happened. They are not the only movement mentioned by name. There's also another movement called Make Afrikaners Great Again. And there are a number of, shall we call them, even Solidarity and AfriForum will call them the fringe right-wing groups. So the most extreme. And let me say this, while I would portray Solidarity and AfriForum as right-wing, they are most definitely not the fringe at all. So let's keep that distinction in mind. But they are the most prominent spokespeople of this narrative, even though they don't ever use the word genocide by name. They allude to it. They play on, perceptions around it. And also, they are actually the only properly organized voice amongst Afrikaners. It is as simple as that. Those who disagree are not organized in the same way. So it's if you dissent or do not agree, you speak out as an individual, not as an organization. They are the organizational face. But the problem is, even though they are the organizational face of Afrikaners, they are not of all Afrikaners, even though they will allude to that as well. So not in my name refers to any organization that peddles this particular narrative.
Yeah. Before we talk about who now speaks for the Afrikaner, just for fun, you said make Afrikaners great again.
Great again, yes.
Is that actually a movement? There's a movement that calls themselves that? Do you know who they are?
No, actually. I think they have or rather, these characters now came to the fore. They had a wonderful photo opportunity when they marched on the US consulate or embassy in Pretoria with massive banners called Make Afrikaners Great Again. And I mean, goodness, I have the names of these characters and they've escaped me again already because I don't pay much attention to the fringe. But
I suppose naming them these characters is a characterization of how you see
exactly, exactly. That's very true. And I realize it's not just characterization. I'm busy caricaturing. But okay, I have spent many years studying the far right in a historical context. Now we're talking about the 1930s, 1940s, and those are literally very interesting characters.
Yeah, no. As I said to you before, I think we should talk to everybody. But okay, that's a discussion for another day. The question really is, though, and I think that's part of the debate, is who's actually representing the Afrikaner voice. And I'm having difficulties trying to figure out now who speaks for who in South Africa. And I'm trying to pin down for myself what is the majority kind of feeling amongst Afrikaners today. And that seems to be very, very difficult to pin down. You're part of the South African elite, of course. You are an academic. You're a so-called progressive, liberal-leaning Afrikaner academic. So, are you?
No.
I mean, you get the criticism, don't you? You know that.
I get that criticism all the time, I know, but tongue-in-cheek, the people who criticize me definitely have an income much larger than my own. I can promise you, university lecturers are woefully underpaid. But when I'm called the elite...
I have, Lindie, just for fun, sorry to interrupt you, I checked that out last night. You guys get paid around about 450,000 Rand a year, am I right?
More or less around that.
Okay,
and then remember,
all right.
we still pay tax.
So that's then not an unfair criticism.
If you think about what the cost of living is and medical aid and school fees and all those things no longer covered by our government, which you have to cover yourself, remember that is an extra tax. The point, though, is get stuck in traffic like every other South African. We don't have solar panels on our roof. If the power goes off, I sit in the dark like any other South African. I have also written off a tire thanks to a massive pothole in the middle of the road. I am on 15 different WhatsApp groups to organize my child's extramural activities like any other parent these days. I have to do the groceries myself. Those kinds of, I see the inflation when I go to the supermarket just like any other person. We have to pay our bills like any other person. Have the same frustrations as all other South Africans. So in the only sense in which I would be elite is I received a particular education. But with that education, I work with first generation students who come from very, very difficult socioeconomic backgrounds in which we constantly have to deal with that and support them and find support services for these kids who are going through very, very difficult, precarious times. So pretending that we are out of touch is a way of trying to disqualify our voice. Yes, I have more degrees, if you want to call it that. Yes, I have a title which qualifies me to do this particular work, but I do a work or a job like any other South African. And I can assure you, if you say 450 a year, at the level at which I work, I'm more or less on par with, I'm a junior appointee, so I'm on par with a teacher. If you want to put it,
you don't have to explain to me.
No, but I think I get your frustration.
No, I get the point, but I think you have to also admit that nobody's trying to claim that you're not in touch with what's happening in South Africa. But Max de Pre used to be my editor when I was the SABC's guy here in Europe. You're not going to tell me that Max de Pre speaks for the average Afrikaner, with respect to Max.
But the thing is, though, what is the average Afrikaner? Because your average Afrikaner, what is our view of them? It's this old, there's so much nostalgia again for the Afrikaner as a farmer, for example. It's a tiny, minute minority of Afrikaners who still live in rural areas and on farms. The majority of your Afrikaners these days are urbanized. Among those, yes, you have your blue-collar workers, but I would argue that amongst Afrikaners, your blue-collar workers are actually not even your majority. The majority of your Afrikaners are educated and white-collar workers. Solidarity as a trade union doesn't really represent as many blue-collar workers as they do white-collar workers. So your average Afrikaner more or less occupies the same type of middle-class position that someone like I do these days. So what is that average that we speak of? And again, sorry, now I'm hammering on the elite concept. It's a way of saying, of trying to distance you from your community, or trying to say that you do not belong to this community. So does Max de Pre speak for the average Afrikaner? I wouldn't say so, but at the same time, is Max de Pre an Afrikaner? Absolutely.
I don't think the claim is that you don't understand or know or that you're not part of the broader idea of what it is to be an Afrikaner. But you do have different. You don't talk on behalf of the really the simple man. I used to be in the media bubble in Johannesburg, Auckland Park, those areas as well. And I know there's a different perspective that comes from, and you also studied apartheid. You lecture apartheid. That does give it a different kind of a color than just Tant Sunny who is sitting on the stoep. That's all I'm trying to say. It's a different opinion. I'm not saying that it's not an Afrikaner or an Afrikaner. I'm just saying that there's a different perspective.
No, I suppose on the one hand, yes. On the other hand, people forget that historians also have families and extended families. And I don't come from an academic family, for example. So I'm the first academic in my part of the family. My grandparents were not.
That sounds like a real Afrikaans thing to say. I'm the first one to go to university.
Exactly. Well, no, I'm not the first to have gone to university, but again, this whole perception of what is an Afrikaner. I mean, what is the simple man? I mean, even that can be a stereotype in your mind. But I think we're digressing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Since we're digressing, you're quite right. let
Yeah.
me be rude. I like the facts. I like the statistics. Here's the fact: Combined Solidarity and AfriForum can claim about 500,000 members. If you
Is that a
turn those
fact?
500,000 members, this is what artificial intelligence is telling me. I spoke to Jaco Kleinhans about 2 weeks ago. He said 700,000. I questioned that as well. But let's say 500,000 seem to be fair. That represents at least 2 million Afrikaners. That represents at least 75% of the Afrikaans population. I will add to that that only represents 3% of the South African population. But it is fair to say that AfriForum and Solidarity has the voice of what appears to be the majority of Afrikaans-speaking people that identify as Afrikaners.
So I'm going to say that they have a substantial voice. I'm going to say that they do have a substantial membership, but I question even the 500,000. Look at their websites very carefully. It's very interesting how neatly the figures add up, far too neatly. Look at the trade unions' websites. They claim more or less 200,000 members. Look at AfriForum's website. They claim more or less 300,000, 350,000. Then they claim all these the other organizations under their umbrella. It neatly counts up or adds up to around 600,000. And that was at the beginning of the year. Now, all of a sudden, these claims, it's also Dirk Herman who has claimed 700,000.
Yeah.
I was in an interview with Flip Base, and then he brought it down to 600,000 again.
Yeah, yeah.
But here's the other point. I asked him
but it's substantial. It's substantial.
But here's the question. Do they duplicate their members? Because remember, you can be a member of AfriForum and, let's say, Helping Hand, and of the FRK, and of the AfriForum and the trade union.
Yeah, I get your point.
And then you can count for 5.
Yeah.
And when I asked him straight out, do they duplicate? He said no, but insiders have told me otherwise.
Yeah.
So
okay, well, it is all very debatable.
Exactly.
I think it's fair to say that they represent a substantial voice in South Africa.
Yes.
I am, like you, also a user of social media. My impression is that they sincerely represent quite a strong sector of the Afrikaner people that identified as Afrikaners. I guess my question is, what does that mean? How would you then, if you're a member of AfriForum of Solidarity, what does it tell us, the rest of the world, about you and your way, your look, your point of view, your view of the world?
So here are some of the dilemmas. And again, I will agree with you that they are a substantial voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I will reiterate that they are the only properly organized voice.
Yeah.
But are they the only opinion out there? No. But here's the other component. They don't have democratic structures. They don't form their views in conversation with their members. I've come across, okay, this is anecdotal, but the amount of members I've come across who are happy with what the trade union does, or happy with what Helping Hand does, but uncomfortable with what AfriForum does, for example. But they don't elect their leaders to begin with. They don't have the trade union itself, because it's subject to trade union regulations in South Africa. That's the only structure in the entire movement that has democratic structures. For the rest, it's the leadership that prescribes whatever position it is they take. They don't have elections. They simply take membership subscriptions as the mandate. So if you pay your membership subscription, that means you must agree with them.
Yeah.
But is this ever tested out in public?
Are there not any other statistics? Are there not any other polls out there that can give us a feeling? Because I'm sincere if I say to you that I'm unable to hammer down now what percentage do we have of people with, let's say, a kind of an AfriForum Solidarity leaning, and what kind of a percentage of people with a so-called more left or a progressive leaning. I'm really trying to puzzle out. Give me the breakdown of that. Is there any way in which we can determine that?
No, because whenever polling is done in this country, they will break it down according to race maybe, or class or income, but not ethnically as much. So it's really just about impossible to determine. I don't think I definitely don't speak for a majority of Afrikaners. Most certainly I don't. Does Solidarity have more of a mandate than I do? Well, yes, because no one pays me membership subscriptions to speak on their behalf. But the point is, there are other voices out there. They're just not necessarily organized. And I think that is probably what it was about.
Sorry, the appearance, and I'm rushing this part because I want to move on to other things. The appearance, though, is that to the average man, the impression is very clearly that the two organizations and their sister or brother organizations, whatever you want to call it, seem to represent the bulk. Let's use that word, of Afrikaners. And the rest seems to be, and then I've got the fly swatter in my hand, the Max de Prees and the Lindie Koorts and Piet Kroukamp. I'm making a bit of a joke of it all now, and perhaps I shouldn't do that, but you get my point. Is that it does appear that they are actually the guys that are speaking for Afrikaners predominantly, and then you've got these couple of voices that are popping up, the more progressive, liberal voices.
Well, the thing is, if you want to call it, and it's hilarious. I mean, I was never mentioned in the same breath as Max de Prees and Piet Kroukamp until a month ago. But things change very quickly.
Yeah.
Again, yes, let's call them the fly swatters, but they've always been around. That's the role of your journalist and your academic and your artist in society. I mean, a tongue-in-cheek, I call it solidarity bingo. Listen to them speak and wait. How long does it take before NP van Wyk Lowe and Paul Kruger are mentioned? You've always had camps or differing views. You've always had one of them in the majority and the other one in a minority. Whichever the majority is, historically, I would say would normally be around somewhere between 60 and 70%, and your minority view would be 30%. Now, ironically, is your conservatives have historically been your 30%. I think they have definitely grown. I think it's closer to a 50%, maybe even reaching the 60%. But it's ahistorical to claim that they would represent the bulk, because that's just not how Afrikaners have functioned.
Let's move on. It's 30 years post-apartheid. Do you think that Afrikaners have reckoned with apartheid? Do you think that we've given apartheid a space and a place in our hearts and our minds? That we've dealt with it?
No, but that's just not how history or historical trauma or any of these things work. We have not even processed the Anglo-Boer War. That still remains very much with us. So I think it's very much a misconception to think that we can leave the past behind. By that, I don't mean live in the past and live under the past at all times, but it's, relating to the past is just part of how human beings function. I do think Afrikaners have made massive strides in the past 30 years, and I don't think it's properly acknowledged at all.
What does that mean?
So, for example, just look at footage from the 1980s again, and then look at footage of South Africa today. Look at what does it look like if you walk into a shop or a restaurant in South Africa today? What does it look like if you walk into any entertainment area or a park? Where I move around in Johannesburg, those have become multicultural, multiracial spaces, which they were not before. We actually do share our physical spaces together as South Africans today. You do not speak to someone who is black or colored in the same way, and now see I use colored instead of brown, but you just do not address and speak to people in the same way you speak to people with respect. We've learned new modes of, shall we say, of conduct, new modes.
Well, hold on. Let me just. I get that. But let me ask you that. When was the last time that you went to a barbecue in Soweto?
No, unfortunately, my black friends all live in the suburbs with me. So you're right. I don't go to the barbecues in Soweto, but I do go to barbecues with multiracial groups of friends.
Yeah. Okay, then respond to this. I got a girlfriend of mine who's made quite a few documentaries about South Africa. A Dutch woman just came back from South Africa, and she said 30 years later, and people seem to still live in their own unique bubbles. Is she right? Is she wrong? Is that just the the observation of a left-wing journalist here in Europe?
Again, it depends on where you go. And isn't that the same in so many countries? So again, Johannesburg, where I live, I consider it very much integrated, but let me put it this way, integrated in terms of class. So if I say yes,
The
I with
marginal
black
top at
people.
you're talking about that 3% at the top. You're
Yeah.
talking about
So
Sandton here. You're talking about the northern suburbs of Johannesburg
I'm
here.
talking about the northern suburbs. Well,
You're not talking about the
much of
people.
Johannesburg, no, but even the East Rand, wherever you go, you'll find that the middle class has become racially integrated. So you still have class segregation.
That's a
But
big
in
thing you've
terms of,
just said there, Lindy. The middle class have become integrated. I
yeah,
mean,
well,
that
it has. Look at our
sounds like wishful
schools.
thinking. I'm just really skeptical
Mm,
because that's really
yeah.
not what I hear, and it's not what I observe. And I know I'm far away
And
from home, so I don't have the right to talk. I should go back home, as they say, and they tell me all the time. But I don't think that
well,
that really reflects the situation in South Africa.
you should see what the schools look like.
Mhm.
Again, let's just put it
Well,
this
those
way.
are
Your
government
private.
schools. It cannot be any other way. It's not a
Yeah,
measure.
so listen, private schools are very integrated,
Hmm.
because your black elites send their kids there.
Yeah.
Your government schools, or actually the correct term is public schools, I get corrected on that all the time. Um, it depends on the area. So in some areas you have the so-called white flight, in other areas you have integration. So look at social media, for example, you will see integration in our schools. You will see integration in our public spaces. Is it perfect? Are we there yet? Absolutely not. But
Well,
gosh, does it look
let
the
me.
same as it did decades ago? It didn't. It
Yeah, sure.
doesn't.
I want to share your optimism as well. I have a girlfriend of mine who's retired and lives in a retirement village in outside Pretoria. I guess a pretty smart one. And she was very happy that a black family moved in the other day.
Yeah.
Isn't that more the real story?
That is where well, again, yes, that's what you want. And I can say I have several black families in my neighborhood and we braai in the street
Yeah,
together.
yeah,
So come on, it's not the paradise yet. But has the integration taken place? Yes. Is it taking place? Yes. When I stand in line to vote, it's actually quite hilarious. When it's municipal elections, most of the people in line with me are white. And when it's national elections, most of the people in line with me are
yeah,
black.
yeah, yeah,
So that's something else to analyze. But that
yeah.
is what it looks like in what I observe around me every day.
Yeah,
If
I'm
I
going to go
walk
back to the
across a
question.
university, yeah.
I'm going to go back to the question that I asked you is whether, and I talk specifically about
Mm.
Afrikaners. I talk about us, Boere, Plattelanders, the little man, the average man, my family, ordinary people. Have we given apartheid a resting place in our hearts, in our minds?
No,
There's a
I
follow-up
don't think
question.
we have. Yeah. Oh, sorry. My apologies.
No,
Do you
no.
want me to answer? Oh, no, I don't think we have. For the simple reason that it's still very much with us. So let me, again, so that whole concept of more than one thing can be true all at the same time.
Mhm.
I just spoke of these integrated spaces that I see every day. But do I also see vast inequality in our country? Yes. That's why I said it's more of a class integration and maybe more of an urban integration than it is across the board. Do we have policies in place today that are aimed at correcting the past that end up creating new forms of, discontent? We do. Do we still have to fill in our race on just about any form that we fill in? We still do. A lot of this remains with us. There's a lot of, let's just put it this way. I see a lot of discomfort amongst whites because, you're trying to be a good person and just function, and you don't want apartheid flung at you around every corner because it never gives
Mm-hmm.
you a chance to rehabilitate yourself, if you want to call it
Mm-hmm.
that. Or you are continually the scapegoat for populists like Julius Malema, for example. You don't feel as if you are fully welcomed into the wider political sphere in South Africa, which is why organizations such as Solidarity and AfriForum become an alternative space.
I was going
Because
to
even
say
the
to you that
Democrat,
I was going to say to you just for fun, you sound a little bit like Aaron's Roots to me now.
yeah, but it's not, it's also true. That's the thing. There's more than one thing that can be true at the same
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And do I deny any of that? No. I don't think Afrikaners have been given enough participation post 94. I do think we are handy scapegoats. I do think making us victims of white genocide just makes us even more vulnerable in that regard. Also, that actually just makes it even worse. Um, I do think that a lot of the ways in which Black economic empowerment has been applied just turned it into a corruption racket. Um, None of that can be denied.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same
Complex.
time, honestly, how do you function within the society? Do you separate yourself, or do you function within the society and say that, you know what, I disagree with corruption in this government, but I also disagree with continued racism? Can you do both?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Let me ask you a very simple question. There seems to be,
mhm,
and you can maybe accuse me of speaking to the wrong people. I don't know what the wrong people are
mhm.
supposed to be, but perhaps I'm talking to the wrong people. But I'm really distinctly getting the impression that people, Afrikaners that I speak to, are not really interested in a revision of apartheid, that we've had enough of that. Don't come and talk
Yeah.
to me about apartheid anymore, is kind of the language. But at the same time, there seems to be my perception, a huge part of the Afrikaner population that does not seem to be receptive to the idea or the claim that apartheid was a bad thing.
Oh. So yes, so as a historian of apartheid, I can say the
It's
majority of
very
people I get,
complicated, Lindie. It's
it's
very
complicated.
complicated.
It's complicated, and it's my job, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, No, to begin with, yes, I feel people are very tired of talking about apartheid because, you're being made the villain in the story all the time. And you can't go in for apartheid denialism, but just for any human being, it's not very pleasant to be the villain in the story because you want to be the hero in your own story.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
were the victims and the heroes in the story of the Anglo-Boer War. We are not that, and that's part of our perception of ourselves, actually, is built around that narrative. And we are definitely the villains in this story, and who wants to be the villain at all times? So rather, let's just stop talking about apartheid is the sentiment in that regard. Others who are frustrated by what they see the collapse in service delivery, what they see as unfair discrimination against their children who were born after apartheid, to them, when they look at the inequality and the poverty that remains in this country, then and also crime and lack of order, that also makes something of a nostalgia for a time when things worked. But there has been a sociological study, I think it was rather Roger Southall of Wits University, who interviewed a large number of older whites, both English and Afrikaners, and his study showed that the vast majority said they don't want a return of apartheid at all. We don't want apartheid back. What we want is a functioning government. And one of my massive frustrations at the moment is you cannot criticize fellow Afrikaners because then you are supposedly giving the government a free pass.
Mhm.
If you criticize the government, then you are praised to high heavens by your fellow Afrikaners, but then you are being seen as some kind of a white racist who harks back to apartheid
Yeah. Yeah.
by the government. It's really a damned if you do, damned if you don't
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
And there's something very wrong with how binary, you know, our worlds and our arguments have become. But that I would call a worldwide phenomenon, not just here.
Okay, let's get back to the reason why I invited you to talk about this declaration. I'm trying to puzzle out who's representing the Afrikaner in South Africa, just in terms of, in very vague and general terms, just for me to get a kind of an understanding of where we are in South Africa and where the Afrikaners are in South Africa. In terms of the whole genocide story and the whispering that happened in Trump's ear. We hear the name Peter Thiel, and we hear Elon Musk, and we hear Kali Krill and Jaco Kleinhans, etc., etc. These were the whisperers around Donald Trump that brought him to that point. Are there any specific meetings by the Kali Krills, the Kleinhanses, the people of solidarity, that sort of you think that tipped the scales for Donald Trump? Are there any declarations or statements that is in the public domain that can say to you, there we go? Because there are people that say we should take them to court for high treason.
So I don't think they should carry all the blame to begin with. Taking them to court for high treason is also a ridiculous party political stunt, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think it's that easy or that possible to point to that tipping point. I mean, there's this moment that's very familiar when during the first presidency, when Ernst Roots managed to get onto Tucker Carlson's show, and that Trump began tweeting on white farm murders straight away, and then you didn't hear much about this again. What I find really interesting is look at their social media pages, look at their own websites. Ernst Roots is a good example, although he has now left the movement. But whenever they meet with someone of substance, they tweet about it. They post photographs. You have photographs of the Solidarity or AfriForum leadership meeting with just about every prominent right-winger across the European continent, and quite a few in the US. Why on earth all of a sudden not post any of this now that they are so close to the White House, I ask you? If it was substantial, they would have trumpeted it. No pun intended. So I actually have questions with regards to how much of a direct impact they had.
Yeah.
I would say that yes, that they have been peddling a narrative, yes. They are not the only ones. Those fringe groups are just as active on social media. And then you see this being retweeted in the United States by, also a whole range of right-wing organizations, because your right-wing in the US also goes from center to mainstream right to fringe right. And my suspicion is you have something of networks overlapping, coinciding, but not necessarily direct contact.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to pinpoint it. I mean, the hearsay that I've heard is more of this would have come through Trump's golfing circles than direct AfriForum interventions. So rather, again, look at it as a wider environment.
Lindie, aren't they just very good at marketing themselves? Taking a picture in front of the White House or taking a picture at the podium. Jaco Kleinhans, you're going to be very angry for me with me saying so, but I saw a lovely picture of you the other day in front of the European Parliament, etc., etc. But we don't actually know who are the people that they actually talking to, and how close are they actually to the inner circle of Donald Trump. We don't really know that.
No, they used to post those pictures. That's my question. Why did they post pictures of the people they spoke to before? And why are they no longer doing that? Because also, think about it this way. The other side of the coin is just as true.
Mm-hmm.
If the white genocide narrative is as powerful and as popular over there, would the right wingers over there not be tweeting their selfies with these South Africans all over their own networks? I mean, I trawled in the same way that you've been trawling for statistics. I trawled through American media for any form of reporting on the deputation, AfriForum deputation from earlier this year. The only reporting I found was the Washington Post reporting on the reporting in South Africa. How did they not get access to prominent news networks in the US, but they could get access to the White House? That doesn't seem to wash with for me. So
yeah.
I do have questions.
I have my questions as well with respect to them, and I thank them for their cooperation with me. But I also got this call from a girlfriend of mine last night saying, "Oh, do you know this chap Adams van Zyl from AfriForum? He's just been on Ongehoord Nederland, the television station here." Then you go and check who's Ongehoord Nederland. You think, oh, it's a little, tiny, little irrelevant television station that reaches maybe 55 people in this country. Anyway, I want to talk to you about the negative fallout of the Trump genocide claim. The first thing that struck me as a person following this from far is, how do black people in South Africa react to these allegations? And what does that mean for race relations in South Africa?
So I have interacted with black people around it, and I can tell you the anger is visceral and palpable. It's, again, let's use a metaphor that would make sense for an Afrikaner person. A few years ago, there was anger in the Afrikaans community when, Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Tory politician in the UK, made the claim that the concentration camps during the Anglo-Boer War were not so bad and not any worse than conditions in Glasgow at the time. We're talking about 120 years ago, and Afrikaners were absolutely furious. How dare you minimize our victimhood and our suffering? And black people with whom I've spoken are furious because, again, their own victimhood and suffering under apartheid is a key, central tenet of their identity post-94. And now the erstwhile perpetrators are pretending, or, according to them, to be the victims. So that really, really struck a nerve. I have seen black South Africans calling on white South Africans to speak up and speak out. And that is interesting. You say the fallout, of course, within the Afrikaans community, the majority reaction was anger. I've been called a traitor. The ultimate, it was not the ultimate insult, but one of the insults also coming from the Anglo-Boer War era as a Hanskaki, tame English soldier. So I'm a tame Englishman these days. But amongst black South Africans, a lot of what shall I say, a positive reaction that there is acknowledgement of apartheid, but there is also a dissenting voice. And interestingly enough, also to say, okay, understanding that not all Afrikaners agree, and that's from black people's side, that, okay, wait, there are other alternative voices, because the only voice they ever hear is the solidarity voice.
Yeah. I must say I've spoken to quite a few black South Africans as well, and the word that registered in my brain was, it hurts. It hurts. I think that's very powerful. It hurts.
Yes.
I did a little bit of research. I'm not a very smart guy, but I did some research about what one could call the measurable direct effects on what has occurred since Trump rebranding of South Africa. There seems to be, according to Satur, the quarterly third quarter here report, showing a 15 to 20% dip in tourism in South Africa. I don't know how whether these statistics are being discussed in South Africa. I noted here European tourists dropped from 450,000 arrivals in the third quarter of 2024 to 374. That's a 17% drop, and that represents, in lost revenue, about 2.5 billion rand lost to South Africa. The Google searches are spiked around the word South Africa and genocide internationally. We talk about a 250% jump in Google search trends, that instead of, in the old days, when you would Google South Africa, you will Google words like wildlife, tourism, diversity. It's now searched up to something like 250% up the word race violence, black fear, unrest, genocide. There's been a so-called investment chill, according to Bloomberg, a 12% drop in third quarter foreign direct investment in inflows in South Africa. The July-September figures for 25 clocks in at about 18 billion rand lost. 18 billion rand lost. Now, once again, I'm not a smart guy, but to me that sounds like a wrecking ball. I noted here that they say that sectors like renewables, I don't know what they mean of renewables, and mining, where the investors seems to be most spooked about this genocide brand that we had gotten in South Africa. Perception internationally has shifted quite dramatically. The shift in global perception after Trump's genocide claim is quite stark. YouGov, that's an organization, a polling organization in the UK, they shows that nature and safaris, once 48% top of mind terms, are now just 32%, while racial unrest jumps to 22% as the leading negative for South Africa, up from 5%. Brandwatch, a similar polling organization, scan of 1.2 million mentions, finds negative sentiment surging 40% for South Africa, from 25% up to 65%, drowning in words like genocide and unstable. And I noted specifically here from YouGov, the British polling organization, what people used to love about South Africa, its diversity, its wildlife, is fading fast. Well, the ugly stuff that Trump has planted, genocide, violence, is now front of mind. Isn't that something that we should talk about in South Africa? Is that talked about in South Africa? Are we taking notice?
I haven't picked it up in the same way in the South African media, unfortunately, and that is terrifying. One thing I will say, as I said before, I mean, no one, were aiming at becoming refugees. I mean, if you say Solidarity has been working the international networks for years, and not just in the US, even more so in Europe, being declared refugees was definitely not their plan. They wanted to put pressure on the ANC government. They did not think that this is what's going to happen. So, I mean, they were peddling water at first when the announcement came. And from there on, it snowballed into what you have just described, which tells me the extent to which Donald Trump is a loose cannon. You cannot tame that particular tiger. And the amount of unforeseen consequences, because this, not just would people be spooked, but also if we are not in favor with the US, that's another way of spooking investors, because that makes us even more unstable and probably at the receiving end of more tariffs and more punitive measures, which would make their investments in this country unsafe. And it's South Africans across the board who will lose their jobs as a result of this. Black poor South Africans even more, but your white South Africans just as much. So this has really, really blown up in a way that no one could have foreseen. Again, I don't think it's been trumpeted, and this time no pun intended, as much in our local media. I think the local media is far more obsessed with the whodunit, I suppose, with the G20 and standing up to Trump and building other new relationships in South Africa, maintaining its dignity as a sovereign country. And we're not taking as much account of the actual losses in revenue and in our, international image.
Yeah. Isn't it? I mean, it's worrying, isn't it, Lindie? I always tell people the story that when I take a taxi and I go into town, I'm about 10 minutes ride from the city center of Amsterdam, and people pick up my funny Dutch accent, and they always ask me, where you're from? And I always say South Africa. And I can so distinctly recall how the taxi driver back in the 90s reacted. Oh, Mandela. How the taxi driver in 2010, 2015 reacted, and how today, when I take that same taxi and I go to the city and they pick up my accent, they will say to me, "Oh, South Africa, and then specifically, that's where genocide is taking place," or specifically, that's where there is reverse discrimination, or that is where black people are now killing white people. That's a perception that is out there amongst ordinary people. So my question, I guess, is I wonder whether South Africans are aware of, while we're talking about genocide and it's genocide or not genocide, and I think the latest talk is not anymore about whether there's a genocide or not. I wrote down here for myself, it's fair to say that the international community rejects the idea that there's a genocide in South Africa. Solidarity, AfriForum, Lex Libertas, Roots, Khalid Kriel, Jaco Kleinhans, they all also reject the claim of genocide. They say, no, there's no real genocide, but they're saying it's about Gregory Stanton's steps towards genocide. So when you talk to your friends or to ordinary South Africans, is that where the discussion has moved to now, today, that there's a general acceptance perhaps that maybe there's not a genocide, but sure as hell we are, at least I think Aaron's Root said stage 6 or 7 of genocide?
It depends on the circles in which you move. So no, not in my circles. But here again is the problem with how binary this is. And it played itself out for the world to see in the White House. No one is going to deny that we have a crime problem and that murders do take place on farms and that these are viciously violent. But to say, oh, it's not a genocide, we just have a crime problem, that doesn't exactly make it any better. It doesn't make, it's that doesn't fix it, because then you just, instead of saying, okay, we have racial violence, you are reiterating and confirming that we do have unacceptable levels of violence and crime, and that South Africans are unsafe in this country. I felt, in a sense, when that confrontation took place in the White House, I thought, well, this is hanging out our dirty laundry for the whole world to see. If crime had been addressed in the ways that it ought to have been addressed, there would have been far less fuel to this fire. And again, correcting it with saying, okay, but we do have grannies in townships being murdered, that does not make it any better at all. And what frustrates me very much is, by centering this around whites and white genocide, again, it's a wonderful distraction for the government from actually addressing the crime, because we don't see any proper actions being taken to look into the conditions that have given rise to these narratives. We just see a new round of scapegoating. Yeah. And as much as I would disagree with Solidarity and AfriForum, I would also say, who gave them the oxygen? Who created the fertile soil in which they could grow? Honestly, the government should look at this also in some degree as something of its own making. Not in the same way that Solidarity blames it and says, oh, well, this is all your own fault. But, in a sense, there's a part of me that says that your extremists can't live without each other. I mean, think about it. Solidarity or AfriForum, where would they be without Julius Malema? But where would Julius Malema be without them? And again, this is not helping anyone at all. Yeah.
Well, but how do you solve it though? Let's talk about, or let's hone in. I think we're running out of time already. Let's just hone in on the specifics here that people are talking about. The pet hates, the things that's on everybody's lips. Let's talk about farm killings. Once again, it's been suggested that farm killings is the sign that we are on that ladder, that Stanton ladder. So I guess the question is very simply again: is farm attacks part of a form of or a move towards genocide or not?
I do not think they are a move towards genocide. I do think that they are something. Any farm murder, one farm murder is a farm murder too much. I Honestly, I don't think that our past doesn't play a role in the violence of these crimes. If you think about it, so farms are isolated. Your attackers have time to perpetrate horrific acts of violence in the process. And shall we deny that there's a long history of, anger, hatred, inequality, violence in this country that all comes into play in the process? We cannot deny that. But there are, again, it's not organized. It's not coordinated. These are, one would say, acts of violence that reflect everything that is wrong in our society. But are these systematic steps towards genocide? No. Does it make it any better if I say these are horrific acts of violence that reflect the society? It doesn't make it any better at all. Because again, this tells us this is a society that needs to fix these things desperately. And we're stuck in the framing, and instead of actually doing something about it, as you have just said.
I've interviewed a number of people that were directly affected by farm murders, brutal attacks. I spoke a couple of months ago as Heidi Taljaard of the Hartswater killings in South Africa. I spoke to a farmer, I can't remember his surname now, Leon, a man who literally cried throughout the entire interview, telling me in the most horrific details what happened to him and his family and to his wife. So just as a human being, I'm really embracing and making it my own pain as well. And I'm outraged by it as well. But the fact is, and I'm having this difficult confrontation with myself because I'm specifically talking to somebody from the Transvaal Agricultural Union tomorrow. Got a meeting planned with a chap who's going to tell me about the statistics. But when I read the statistics, I still come to 0.1, I think, or 0.2% of the total figures for murders in South Africa, 27,000 murders every year, roughly 70 farm murders every year. So why do we focus specifically on the farm killings, and why do we insist internationally as well that the South African government should treat farm killings different from the violent, ordinary killings that are happening in South Africa with the same, in many cases, atrocious characteristics, the torture, etc., etc.? Why do we make the distinction?
So I cannot give you a full factual answer, but I can give you my sense of it. So let's not say this is the reason why, but I would offer an interpretation. And to that, I offer the extent to which, even though the majority of your Afrikaners today are urbanized, we still have that identity. Farming is part of our national narrative for how long? We're originally a farming community. We're called Boers. I mean, I said to a black colleague the other day, ironically, if a black person calls you a Boer, it's a slur, but it doesn't land as a slur. Because it is one of our multiple identities. The symbolism around farmers. Think of our literature. Think of the revival of nostalgia around farming. If you look at just television and films these days, I mean, the fact that we have the farm novel, the Plaasroman, should tell you how central all of this is. So I think the symbolism, again, strikes a very, very deep chord.
It strikes at the heart of our identity, is what you're saying.
It strikes at the heart of the identity, and also, again, I spoke to another black colleague also recently about, think of the old so-called frontier wars in the old Eastern Cape. Think of the stories of the Great Trek. It's always your lone farmer against the, this unknown black killer, and the black killer is always part of the majority, and you have your vulnerable, isolated white farmer. That narrative comes from the 19th century, late 18th century already. It's been repeated in our history over and over again. This is almost like the new frontier war, if you want to call it that. it resonates in ways that nothing else resonates. But also one should say, and this is terrible to say, that's the world over. Kill a white person and it makes the headlines in ways that the killing of a black person doesn't, unfortunately.
Yeah. I'm going to say something here, and I know a lot of the viewers I have this will make me very unpopular. I have tried now for the last 6 months to get organizations to help me to get to black victims. And it saddens me to have to say to you that I've not been able to actually get one single organization who could lead me to a black victim of farm murders. And they are there. There are many of them. They make a substantial part of the statistics. And yet I've not been able to get hold of one single black family to tell me their story, which I think we ought to tell. Which I think is part of the story in South Africa. You can make of that whatever you want to make of that. I'm going to run through the themes very quickly now with you. Black economic empowerment. Is that good old? And let's forget about the corruption of that. I understand fully how it's corrupted. I understand fully how it has enriched a very small proportion. I understand the argument that it's not working. It's the laws as it is. I understand all of that. But the principle, the idea of black economic empowerment, is that good old-fashioned affirmative action, or is that race-based laws?
Good question. I would call it affirmative action that probably turned into race-based, for the simple reason that you've just seen the extent to who is in and who is out. But even that, it's not even fully race-based because it's elite-based. The vast majority of your black South Africans do not have access to those kinds of deals or resources.
Yeah.
It's an elite transfer of resources.
But you're addressing the corruption within it, or the wrong application of it.
It's almost impossible. No, I think there's something in terms of.
Do you think that we have a moral obligation in terms of our history, and do you think that it is fair to say, well, you know what, they stood out in the cold, and we have an obligation to push them to the front of the line?
I would say that it's been used as a blunt instrument and heavy-handedly. Think about it this way. If you had no affirmative action, the old boys clubs would have continued on indefinitely because you would be hired on account of whether or not you're a good cultural fit or not. So sometimes you do need these kinds of measures just to break the old chains, if you want to call it that. It's to everyone's benefit if we are less unequal, if we tap into more of our human resources and remove the barriers to advancement. But does it have to take place in the heavy-handed way and in the, I want to say, almost clumsy way that it has been implemented? No. So something of the principle, yes, but not all of it as much, because again, if the structures are created for entrepreneurs to advance, more of them will. But in the end, it's just, if you keep sabotaging or self-sabotaging your economy, you are not creating new opportunities. You are simply just transferring wealth. Yeah. And that doesn't help anyone. Yeah. So that's why even after a while, Black economic empowerment became broad-based Black economic empowerment, because there's a recognition of the elitism. But again, these are pretty words. So let's just say I would take some components of it, yes, but not the full package.
Yeah, yeah. Isn't it? And why do we seem so reluctant to talk about it? The ideas of Black economic empowerment was I think the idea came, from, was it the managing director or whatever from Sanlam or something like that, a prominent Afrikaans businessman who came up with the idea of black economic empowerment. But that actually really goes back to the talks that the African National Congress had with the Anglo-Americans and the top economic hands in South Africa back in the mid-80s, when I would suggest to you the first black economic empowerment deal was actually struck with Cyril Ramaphosa. Why do we seem so reluctant to actually really say it so vividly and clearly and in your face, as history is in fact proving to us?
Very simple, because the moment it is portrayed as a handout, it diminishes the person who received it.
A corrupt deal. It's nothing less, nothing more.
Well, no. I mean, Sanlam issued shares to, or made shares available to black shareholders.
Gave shares, simply. From one hand, from the white hand to the black hand. Isn't it as simple as that?
But in that regard, it could have been used as a starting point in, what is it? I think it was Trevor Noah who said the old saying of give a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach him to fish, he eats for life. And Trevor Noah said, well, you've got to give him a fishing rod at least. So giving the fishing rod, I don't think is the problem. But
that one before, I like that, was one hell of a fishing rod that they gave Ramaphosa.
That's the thing. It's like what happens with a fishing rod is not the same as give him the entire I&J company, right? That's the point. You do need some form of a transfer, but not in the same way. And yes, we are reluctant to talk about it because it diminishes these, the new elite, because then it's just a handout and they did not achieve this for themselves, but it is whispered very often.
Yeah, I would argue that is the very first seeds of corruption that were sown in this whole thing. All of that flowed out of that. It started right at the top. First man to be bought, I think, was Cyril Ramaphosa. I think there's Saki. I don't remember the surname of this person. I think the Segwales were part of the deal. I think it happened in a farm somewhere in Zambia or something like that. I read a beautiful article about it the other day where they were sipping wine and making these deals and sending messages back to the Oppenheimers and the white elite to okay the deal that was being cut, while they were whispering to Mandela and the prison cells as well to get the deal done. I believe today firmly that is sowing the first seeds of the corruption that we are suffering today.
I will take it even further back. I would take it back to all the aid money received by the ANC in exile. There's this lovely one-liner in Stephen Ellis's book, External Mission, in which he mentions that the Swedes actually contributed more to the ANC than the Russians in terms of finances, but the ANC preferred the Russians to the Swedes because the Russians did not ask so many questions.
Yeah.
It's unfortunately...
Although there's a caveat there, though, Lindie. Most of these organizations were workers' organizations that gave. I know here in Holland it was the workers' organizations, unions, that actually gave a lot of the money to ANC. That makes it a little bit more palatable. That's...
No, I don't mean in terms of the giver. I mean in terms of the taker. In terms of how the money was received and utilized and applied you had hierarchies within the ANC in exile already. And those hierarchies were transferred. And as you say, from there on, the backers became corporate South Africa instead of these international backers.
I think Thabo Mbeki boasts in his own. I met Mbeki on many occasions as an SABC journalist, and I really have great respect for this man till this day. I find him a profoundly smart person. But I think he boasts in his own book that he was a millionaire before he got back from exile.
Exactly that, but also I will say I found in Jan Smuts's papers these references to the Oppenheimers taking him along to really lavish holidays, I think around, Lake Tanganyika as it was called at the time. So that's the way in which corporate South Africa has functioned even before 1994, unfortunately. So the seeds of corruption, unfortunately, have been with us for a while. My question these days very often is, do we spend enough time to study how elites function? Because these are patterns I see repeated everywhere.
A book for you to write, perhaps?
Hopefully. Hopefully.
Yes. We talked about Not in My Name and the role that these organizations, AfriForum and Solidarity, and these people play in all of that. I want to, and I'm specifically zoning in on the trouble spots. Crime is a very big problem in South Africa. It's gone out of control, is a total understatement. But do we understand fully in South Africa that most of the crime that happens in South Africa actually affects Black people?
I don't think we understand it enough. Again, this is completely anecdotal, but my family moved to Johannesburg in the 1990s, and now I still live in Johannesburg. I remember the fear of crime being far worse in the 90s, and you heard far more stories about people close to you being the victims of crime than you do these days.
Yeah.
I mean, when's the last, I can't remember the last time I spoke to someone in my circles who was hijacked or held up at gunpoint. There was a lot of that before. I'm not saying it has disappeared. It still happens. Maybe our security is better. Maybe we've become more savvy, or maybe it just tells you the extent to which violence, crime has reconcentrated itself onto the most vulnerable in our society.
Yeah.
It's the most vulnerable, those who cannot pay for their safety, who suffers most. And no, we don't have enough of that conversation at all.
Yeah. Do you live in one of those walled off kind of, what do they call them?
No, I don't live in an estate. Yes, I've been accused of living in an ivory tower
Most of
and
your
an
friends
air-conditioned
do?
office.
Yeah.
No, we actually don't. I know one or two people who live in an estate like that. I will say I live in a tiny complex. So these are, so yes, we do have
You go through
a wall.
gates? Is there
We
some
do have
guy
a
standing
gate.
there with a gun?
Yep. No, he doesn't have a gun. No, we do have security cameras. We do have a security guard. We do have entry and exit codes. But this is, your run-of-the-mill suburban little complex compared to these big landed estates, which have become almost like bubbled worlds onto, of their own. But still, yes, walls are here, electric fencing, cameras, security, armed response, all those things are present.
Yeah. I want to share with you the statistics that I got here to orientate myself around crime in South Africa. About 22% of South Africans reported. We're not talking about the ones who are not reporting. I believe there's a lot of people not reporting, but 22% of South Africans reported being a victim of a crime last year. That's over 12 million people. That's just about where I'm sitting here in the Netherlands, just about the whole population that's been victims of crime. It is incredible. But the murder rate's 300% more likely in a township than in a white suburb. I'm not talking about those gated communities now. I'm just talking about a regular suburb, white suburb. Rape, sexual violence, 275% more likely in a township than in, once again, a very ordinary white suburbs where I grew up as a kid. Housebreaking and burglary, 213% more likely in a township than in a white suburb. One would imagine there's more to be stolen in a white suburb than in a township, but those are the figures. Robbery, 275% more likely in a township than in a white suburb in South Africa. Before I start closing down now, my question, and that's a question I get asked here a lot, is are people aware in South Africa, and now I'm laying the whole guilt trip on you, that as you and I are sitting and chatting here, that there's about 12 million people tonight that will go to bed without enough food in their stomachs in our country.
Yeah. I had that thought about a week or two ago that sometimes it's just incredibly difficult to be a human being in this country, because in a sense we desensitize ourselves just to get through the day, because the moment you think of the full magnitude, it's incapacitating. I once had German friends visit and took them around, and they looked at the inequality and said, but how can you live with this?
Yeah.
How can you accept this? And the sense of helplessness that we have, because the structural poverty in this country is greater than any individual can address. Anything you do, and we do what we can, is always that metaphorical drop in a bucket. So when you allow yourself to contemplate the full force of 12 million people not eating this evening, it's paralyzing, it's incapacitating. And then you ask, what am I able to do about this?
Yeah.
And many people do what they can in their small ways. But that's why we need to address this structurally, because, again, how else can you be a human in this world?
Yeah. But here's my question to that is, we talk about all these different things. We're having fights about all sorts of things in South Africa. But what I don't see reflected in the South African press is this ginormous emergency that we have, namely this massive gap, poverty, income, wealth gap in South Africa. And is that not exactly the core of every single problem that we face today? Is that not why we have farm murders? Is that not why we have the brutality and the character of the farm murders? Because the guys on the wrong end of the spectrum have got nothing to lose anymore. They've lost it because they were brought up in shacks and they lived according to the values of the shacks. Isn't that the most urgent thing that needs to be addressed on a daily basis, that should fill the covers of our newspapers every single day?
I think that's, yes, absolutely. And think about this. Poverty is intensely dehumanizing. So as you say, those guys who have left nothing to lose, they have been dehumanized throughout their lives to begin with. But we trumpet it, no matter how much you repeat it, it's so all-encompassing, all-enduring, all over. People have become desensitized to it. And that is part of the problem. The other part of the problem, I will take this straight back to ANC government corruption, because structural inequality is one thing, and it is with us. But oh my goodness, you mentioned the billions we've lost this year. More than that has been stolen from us.
Yeah, yeah.
If they simply, ironically, just stop stealing and putting the resources where they're supposed to be. And in that regard, I will say what the taxpayers are paying. I mean, I said earlier on when you asked if I'm elite, and I said, well, remember, people like me pay taxes, but we still pay for private security and schooling and healthcare, for example. Duties that ought to be performed by our government. Yeah. We are relieving them of those duties. And still the money we pay for taxes are not being applied in a way that will address the inequality in our country properly. And until then, we're going to be shouting and scapegoating, but this is not going to change.
Yeah, yeah.
So that one, I will say, I will give some leeway for long-term structural inequality, but I will say a lot of it could have been better by now.
Yeah, yeah.
Much better.
Yeah, and I absolutely believe that as well. And that's why I talk about the deal that was struck in the 80s. That's why I talk about the billions in the pocket of Cyril Ramaphosa, because there's only one word to describe it. It's vulgar. It's vulgar. The corruption is vulgar. It's a lovely German term that I learned when I lived in Germany. It's zum Kotzen. You can deduct from that what that means. I want to end on a perhaps a petty note, perhaps also an unfair note. I really believe that we need to be honest with ourselves and to ourselves in South Africa. We owe it to ourselves to really face the reality as it is. But what I want to get to, a lot of people say to me, since the end of apartheid, did you as a people, I talk about us as Afrikaners, did you as an organization, communities, churches, did you reach out to the black people of South Africa? Did you, as ordinary citizens, reach out to try to start a genuine dialogue between the kitchens of the little town that I grew up in, Edenvale, outside Johannesburg and Soweto? It's not a question. I'll give you my answer, and I think the answer is inherent in what I'm going to say to you now. I did some research last night, and I based this on what I read when I read your declaration. You talk about, let me put it the way I phrased it here for myself. From your declaration, you wrote, as Afrikaners, we are foremost a Christian people. We acknowledge the immense suffering inflicted by the apartheid regime under Afrikaner nationalist rule. We are committed to, and this is the important part, we are committed to the ongoing work of atonement. That's the word that stayed in my mind. Atonement, restitution, and building a truly non-racial society. So the word atonement stood out for me. So I thought, go and Google it quickly. What exactly does the word atonement mean? It means restoring balance after wronging someone or something through genuine regret. The genuine is the important part of it. Repair or sacrifice. It's that deep, heart-level reconciliation that we talk about. So as an old dog, I thought, well, let me go and see how that atonement thing all works. What have we as ordinary Afrikaners and our communities do to reach out, to atone, in your words? First thing I did is I thought, well, let's go to the churches. Let's go and see what the church in South Africa has done over the last 30 years. Here we go. Over 30 years, the NG Kerk, the Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa, has been running a kind of a charity for change. It's music to the ears. For atonement, that specific atonement that you're talking about. Now, what does that mean? It means that 1,158 churches in South Africa has spent 50 million rand total on what they label restitution. That means 1,400 rand per church per year. That's the amount of money that's been spent on atonement in our churches. The source that I've got for this information is, in fact, the church itself, Healing of Memories and Restitution Grants on their own website. So let me say that again to you, and I'm going to ask you your comment on that. About, is there a need for reflection in South Africa? Is there a need to revisit apartheid and where we come from, and for us to talk about these things? So let me say again, the average Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa has spent the grand sum of 1,400 rand per year the last 30 years for the atonement. I add to that it's time for us to be honest about who we are and where we're going in South Africa. And I know I sit here in the comfort of my little apartment in Amsterdam. So when you reflect on that, and you ask yourself today the question, have we really, truly revisited for ourselves our own history, and have we given it a place and a space in our hearts when we talk about all these things that you and I spoke about today?
Again, not enough. But so what I would add to that, I mean, those numbers don't line up with my experience, I will say. Just because I've been to congregations or involved with congregations who do a lot more within their communities than 1,400 rand a month.
Yeah.
So maybe that is from an official fund, but still, let's not dispute that, because you're right. So the Dutch Reformed Church is its own source. So what happens on an ad hoc basis, I think, is more. But have we atoned enough, if you want to call it that? No. Can we atone enough? I don't think so either. But there are other components. For example, during the transition, there were peace structures set up throughout the country. I'm sure you would recall them, in which you had communities, churches included, brought together from across the board. And what did the ANC government do? It disbanded them. These grassroots organizations that would have done so much for reconciliation at grassroots level. The government tried to centralize reconciliation. And that was done away with. I mean, I agree with you. I also have the greatest respect for Thabo Mbeki, but through that centralization, there was also a form of Africanization under his ANC. None of this was done from government side. But now let's not make it the government's job to atone all by itself. It disbanded structures that would have helped and would have enabled and did not do anything else from its part. What did Afrikaners do from their side? I think we have probably spent the past 30 years disorientated, disorganized, apart from the reorganization of the old mine workers union into the solidarity movement. That organization was inward looking. A lot of our organization is inward looking. I know of a number of NGOs that does the work of atonement, that does reach out. A lot of Afrikaners in their individual capacity do that, or are part of other NGOs where they are not there as Afrikaners, but there as citizens. But is it enough? Not for 1 minute. But is it nothing? No, that's not true either. And there's a part in which Afrikaners continue to squabble amongst each other for the soul of the Afrikaner, if you want to call it that, to define ourselves, who speaks for us, etc., as we started at the beginning. And that is healthy as far as I'm concerned. We need to continue these debates because that is just how people deal with identity, deal with the past. In that regard, we are constantly grappling with our past. Even if you deny it, it means it's a form of interaction with the past. But can we do more? Yes. Should we do more? Yes. How do we do more? We need to be organized in a way that is outward looking and not inward looking. And I suppose people like me, the fly swatters, who criticize the solidarity movement from the outside, part of our criticism of them is we would support you if you were more outward looking in what you do. We would support you if your soup kitchens, and I know they don't just look after the white community, they do actually have projects that reach across, all races, but that is not the focus, and that's minuscule compared to what they do elsewhere. But if they became a broad-based South African organization that holds the government to account and helps us to integrate, as co-partners in this country, they would have my support tomorrow. Is it their job solely? No. Part of the problem with the lefties, and I don't consider myself a lefty, by the way, even though I'm called that, so I'll call myself slightly left of center, is we talk, but we do not organize. And organization does need to happen.
Yeah.
Ironically, though, I will say this. I've been in talks when these lefties or left off centers like me try to organize. The moment they do it, the part of the debate comes, do we do this as Afrikaners or as South Africans? And very quickly, the decision is made to do it as South Africans, not as Afrikaners. So you won't see their traces or their footsteps or footprints in the same way. Because they try to eschew this kind of ethnic exclusivity. And gets it, it somehow is then not taken up and seen in the same way.
Yeah. Dr. Lindie Koorts, spokesperson for the Not in My Name declaration. Thank you very much indeed for this discussion.
Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed it.